The cold steel of a service weapon pointed directly at her chest wasn't entirely foreign to Special Agent Kendra Vaughn. Usually, though, the finger on the trigger belonged to a cartel enforcer or a desperate fugitive cornered in a warehouse, not a uniformed patrol cop on a quiet, rain-slicked Georgia highway. The flashing red and blue lights painted a terrifying, surreal scene in the dead of night. She was a black woman alone on a desolate stretch of road, facing an officer drunk on his own authority. But what this arrogant cop didn't know was that he hadn't just pulled over a random civilian. He had just pointed his loaded Glock at the commander of a federal task force, and his world was about to collapse within moments. The relentless downpour hammered against the roof of the dark gray Chevrolet Malibu, the rhythmic thudding mirroring the exhausted, steady beating of Kendra Vaughn's heart. It was late at night. Kendra, a seasoned supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, was navigating the treacherous, winding curves of Highway 119, deep in the heavily wooded outskirts of Oak Haven County. She had just wrapped up a grueling undercover surveillance operation in neighboring Atlanta. The operation had been a resounding success, a multi-agency takedown of a sprawling narcotics ring that had taken years to build. But right now, the adrenaline had completely faded, replaced by a bone-deep weariness that settled in her shoulders like lead weights. She drove exactly the speed limit, keeping her eyes peeled for deer that frequently darted out from the thick pine forests lining the asphalt. Her plainclothes attire, a simple black turtleneck and dark jeans, offered no hint of her profession. Her gold FBI shield and credentials were safely tucked into the inner pocket of her windbreaker, resting on the passenger seat right next to her agency-issued Glock 19, holstered securely. A few miles behind her, idling in the obscured entrance of an abandoned gas station, sat an Oak Haven Police Department cruiser. Inside were Officer Grayson Hale and his rookie partner, Officer Nolan Reed. Hale was a veteran of the local force, a man whose personnel file was thick with civilian complaints regarding excessive force, racial profiling, and severe attitude issues. Yet in a small town where the good old boy network remained stubbornly intact, Hale had always managed to skirt any real consequences. He viewed his badge not as a shield to protect the innocent, but as a crown that made him the undisputed king of his small rural jurisdiction. Reed, barely out of the academy, sat nervously in the passenger seat, staring out at the rain. He had already begun to dread riding with Hale. "Look at this one," Hale muttered, his eyes narrowing as Kendra's Malibu passed their hidden position. Out-of-county plates, dark tint, driving a little too perfectly, don't you think, Nolan? Nobody drives exactly the speed limit on this road at this hour unless they're hiding something. Maybe they're just trying not to hydroplane, Reed suggested timidly, wiping condensation from the window. "The roads are awful tonight," Hale scoffed, slamming the cruiser into drive. "You've got a lot to learn, kid. People out here at this hour are either running from something or running to something. Let's go see what she's got in the trunk." The cruiser surged forward, its powerful engine roaring as it tore down the highway in pursuit. Inside her car, Kendra checked her rearview mirror and sighed heavily. A pair of headlights was approaching rapidly, closing the distance at an aggressive speed. She maintained her pace, ensuring she was entirely within her lane. When the distance closed to less than a car length, the blinding red and blue light bar erupted to life, piercing the darkness and reflecting off the heavy rain. Just what I need tonight, Kendra thought, her jaw clenching. With practiced calm, she activated her right turn signal, smoothly decelerated, and guided the Malibu onto the muddy shoulder, bringing it to a complete and safe stop. She shifted the transmission into park, turned off the engine, and rolled down her window, letting the cold, damp air rush into the cabin. Following standard law enforcement protocol to ensure the approaching officer felt safe, she kept her hands firmly planted at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, illuminated by the dim glow of the dashboard. She watched in the side mirror as the driver's side door of the cruiser opened. Officer Grayson Hale stepped out into the rain. He didn't rush. He took his time, adjusting his heavy utility belt, his hand resting casually but menacingly on the grip of his holstered firearm. He unclipped a high-powered tactical flashlight, intentionally keeping the beam trained directly at the driver's side mirror to blind whoever was inside. Officer Reed flanked the passenger side of the Malibu, looking deeply uncomfortable, the collar of his raincoat pulled up against the weather. Hale approached Kendra's window. He shone the blinding 1,000-lumen beam directly into her face. Kendra squinted, turning her head slightly to protect her vision, but she didn't flinch. "License and registration," Hale barked, his voice dripping with inherent hostility. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't state his name or his department. "Good evening, officer," Kendra replied, her voice remarkably steady, carrying the quiet authority of a woman who managed federal task forces for a living. "Could you please lower the flashlight just a bit? It's right in my eyes." Hale stepped closer, deliberately keeping the beam fixed on her pupils. "I said license and registration. I don't take requests from you." Kendra took a slow, deep breath, regulating her temper. She was tired, but she was a professional. She knew exactly how traffic stops were supposed to go, and she knew exactly what kind of cop she was dealing with. "My driver's license is in my wallet in my back pocket," Kendra stated clearly, narrating her movements as she had been trained to do. "My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for my license first." "Just hand it over," Hale snapped impatiently, leaning closer to the window, the scent of stale coffee and chewing tobacco radiating from him. Kendra slowly reached behind her, extracted her leather wallet, pulled out her Georgia driver's license, and handed it through the window. Hale snatched it from her fingers. He shone the light on the plastic card, squinting at the name in the photo. "Kendra Vaughn?" Hale read aloud, mispronouncing her last name with a mocking drawl. "You're a long way from Atlanta, Kendra. What are you doing creeping through my county at this hour?" "I'm driving home from work, officer," Kendra replied calmly. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" Hale's jaw tightened. He hated being questioned. In his mind, his uniform was the only reason he needed. "You were swerving back there, crossing the yellow line. Suspicion of driving under the influence." It was a blatant lie. Kendra knew it, and she knew that Hale knew it. Her driving had been flawless. "I have not been drinking, officer, and I maintained my lane perfectly," Kendra countered, her tone remaining respectful but firm, stripped of any intimidation. "Perhaps your dash cam will confirm that." The mention of the dash cam seemed to strike a nerve. Hale hated citizens who knew their rights. He especially hated when a black woman driving alone in the middle of nowhere dared to look him in the eye and challenge his fabricated narrative. A dark, ugly rage began to bubble beneath his surface. He decided right then that he was going to take Kendra Vaughn down a peg. He was going to show her exactly who owned this stretch of Highway 119. The rain intensified, drumming fiercely against the metal of the vehicles. Officer Nolan Reed stood nervously by the passenger side, watching the interaction through the rain-streaked glass. He could feel the tension radiating from his partner. Reed knew Hale was fabricating the swerving accusation. He had watched the Malibu drive perfectly straight, but he was too intimidated by his senior officer to speak up. Hale leaned his forearm against the roof of Kendra's car, invading her personal space. "Oh, you want to play lawyer tonight?" he sneered, the tactical light still glaring into the cabin. "You think you're smart? Step out of the vehicle." Kendra's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but she kept them completely visible. The situation was escalating rapidly, and it was entirely unprovoked. As a federal agent, her instinct was to immediately de-escalate. But Hale was not operating on reason or protocol. He was operating on ego and prejudice. "Officer," Kendra said, her voice dropping an octave, carrying the serious, no-nonsense weight of her official capacity. "I am happy to cooperate, but I need to inform you of something before I move. I am an armed federal agent. My credentials are in my jacket on the passenger seat, and my duty weapon is holstered underneath it." The words "armed" and "weapon" were the only things that registered in Grayson Hale's adrenaline-flooded brain. Instead of following procedure, which would dictate calmly asking her to keep her hands visible while he verified her credentials, Hale panicked, letting his aggressive instincts take the wheel. "Gun!" Hale yelled, stumbling backward. In a fluid, frantic motion, he drew his Glock .22 from its holster and leveled it directly at Kendra's head through the open window. "Keep your hands on the wheel. Don't you move a muscle or I'll blow your head off." On the passenger side, Reed jumped, instinctively resting his hand on his own weapon but not drawing it. "Grayson, what's going on?" he shouted over the rain. "She's got a gun, Nolan," Hale screamed, his finger resting dangerously close to the trigger, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and power-hungry excitement. "Step out of the car right now with your hands in the air." Kendra remained absolutely still. The barrel of the gun was less than 3 feet from her face. One twitch of Hale's nervous finger, one slip in the rain, and she would be dead. She had faced down cartel sicarios with more trigger discipline than this rural cop. "Officer Hale," Kendra said loudly, ensuring her voice carried over the storm. She had read his name tag. "Listen to me very carefully. I am Supervisory Special Agent Kendra Vaughn with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I am keeping my hands on the wheel. I am not a threat to you. Please lower your weapon." "Shut up," Hale roared, his face turning crimson. The idea that this woman was an FBI agent was to him completely absurd. It was a desperate lie from a criminal trying to avoid an arrest. "Open the door with your left hand. Do it slow." Kendra complied, moving with deliberate, exaggerated slowness. She used her left hand to pull the door handle. She pushed the heavy door open into the rain. "Step out, hands high." Kendra stepped out into the freezing downpour. The rain instantly soaked through her clothes. She raised her hands above her head, standing tall in the mud. She towered slightly over Hale, her posture projecting absolute confidence, despite the gun pointed at her chest. "Turn around," Hale ordered. Officer, Kendra tried again, speaking to the rookie on the other side. Officer Reed, please. My credentials are right there on the seat, the gold badge. Hale didn't let Reed move. He holstered his flashlight, keeping his gun trained on her, and stepped closer. You think I'm an idiot? You think I buy this federal agent crap? Turn around and put your hands on the roof of the car. Kendra turned slowly, placing her palms flat against the wet roof of the Malibu. Hale lunged forward, grabbing her roughly by the shoulder and kicking her legs apart to widen her stance. His actions were unnecessarily violent, designed entirely to humiliate and establish dominance. You're making a catastrophic mistake, officer, Kendra stated softly, staring straight ahead into the darkness. I am telling you for the final time, verify my identity. Hale laughed, a harsh barking sound over the thunder. I'll verify whatever I want when you're in the back of my cruiser. Holding his gun in his right hand, he reached into the open driver's side door with his left. He grabbed the windbreaker sitting on the passenger seat and yanked it out. The heavy leather credential case slipped from the pocket and landed on the wet asphalt with a dull smack. Hale kicked the leather case with the toe of his boot, flipping it open. The heavy gold shield of the FBI gleamed under the flashing police lights. Next to it was her photo identification, clearly marking her as a supervisory special agent. Hale stared at it for a second. A normal officer would have frozen, realized their monumental error, apologized profusely, and backed away. But Hale's ego had built an impenetrable wall against reality. He couldn't be wrong. He wouldn't be humiliated in front of his rookie partner by a black woman he had chosen to bully. Nice prop, Hale sneered, stepping on the leather case and grinding it into the mud. Where'd you buy this? Party City? Amazon? Impersonating a federal officer is a federal offense, sweetheart. You just added years to your sentence. Kendra felt a surge of cold, righteous fury. He was stepping on her badge. The badge she had bled for, the badge she had earned through years of grueling work and sacrifice. Are you completely out of your mind? Kendra asked, turning her head slightly to look at him. Call your dispatcher. Run my name. Run the plate. It will come back to the United States government. Face forward. Hale shoved her face against the wet roof of the car. He holstered his weapon, feeling he had total control, and unclipped his steel handcuffs. You're under arrest for driving under the influence, resisting an officer, and impersonating federal law enforcement. Put your hands behind your back. He grabbed her left wrist, wrenching it backward with enough force to strain her rotator cuff. Kendra gritted her teeth against the sharp pain. She didn't struggle. She didn't fight back. She let the cold steel of the handcuff bite into her left wrist. Nolan, Hale yelled to his partner, get over here and search her car. Find the gun she was talking about. Reed slowly walked around the back of the Malibu, his face pale. He looked down at the badge crushed in the mud. Even through the dirt, the gold seal looked undeniably authentic to him. A knot of pure dread formed in the pit of the young officer's stomach. Grayson, Reed stammered, his voice trembling. Grayson, I think that might be real. The plate. I didn't see any state markings on the plate. Do your damn job, Reed, Hale snapped, grabbing Kendra's right arm to complete the cuffing process. Kendra let her right arm be pulled back. She heard the click of the second cuff. She was officially detained. A federal task force commander, handcuffed in the rain by a renegade local cop. Hale leaned in close to her ear, his breath hot and foul. "Not so tough now, are you, Agent Vaughn? Down here, I'm the FBI, I'm the law." Kendra didn't flinch. She just smiled. A cold, predatory smile that made the hair on the back of Reed's neck stand up. "You're right about one thing, Hale," Kendra whispered quietly over the rain. "The FBI is down here tonight." Officer Hale yanked Kendra backward away from her vehicle, intent on marching her roughly to his cruiser. He had a triumphant smirk plastered across his face, reveling in the false sense of power. He had broken her down, or so he thought. But as he took his first step, the atmosphere on Highway 119 suddenly, violently shifted. It started as a deep, low rumble, a sound that vibrated through the wet asphalt and rattled the puddles. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of high-performance, heavy-duty engines. Officer Reed, still standing frozen by the driver's side of the Malibu, looked up, his eyes widening in absolute horror. Tearing down the highway from the direction of Atlanta, entirely blacked out, without a single headlight shining, were three massive jet-black Chevrolet Tahoes. They moved in perfect, aggressive, tactical formation. They had been tracking Kendra's vehicle via GPS the entire night. A standard protocol when a high-ranking undercover operative was returning from a major sting operation. They had seen the traffic stop begin, and when Kendra's biometric vitals, monitored via her smartwatch, spiked during the gunpoint confrontation, they had accelerated to intercept speeds. When they were 50 yards away, the darkness was obliterated. Hidden strobes embedded in the grills, mirrors, and windshields of all three Tahoes erupted in a blinding, synchronized display of red and blue tactical lights. The sheer intensity of the illumination dwarfed the single Oak Haven police cruiser. Tires screeched and smoked on the wet pavement as the heavy SUVs executed a flawless, aggressive blocking maneuver. The lead Tahoe swerved sharply, cutting off the front of Hale's cruiser. The second Tahoe boxed in the rear, while the third slammed to a halt directly parallel to where Hale was standing with Kendra, mere feet away. Hale froze, his hand still gripping Kendra's arm. The triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of dumbfounded confusion. "What the hell?" he muttered. Before the vehicles had even fully settled on their suspension, the doors flew open. 6 massive figures, clad in full olive-drab tactical gear, poured out into the rain. They wore heavy ballistic vests, adorned with large, bold yellow letters. FBI. They carried M4 carbines held at the low ready. Their movements were sharp, trained, and ruthlessly efficient. Officer Reed immediately threw his hands straight up into the air, backing away from Kendra's car, absolutely terrified. He knew exactly what was happening. Hale, however, was paralyzed by shock. His brain simply could not process the overwhelming show of force materializing out of the dark woods. From the passenger seat of the lead, Tahoe stepped a tall, imposing man in a tailored suit beneath a heavy trench coat. He didn't wear tactical gear, but the authority he carried required no armor. This was Assistant Special Agent in Charge, Donovan Pierce, Kendra's direct supervisor and a man who did not tolerate disrespect toward his agents. Pierce walked purposefully through the rain, his eyes locked dead on Hale. "Oak Haven Police," Hale finally managed to shout, his voice cracking, instinctively reaching for his holstered Glock. "Back off. I have a suspect in custody." The distinct metallic clack-clack of 6 assault rifles being raised and leveled squarely at Hale's chest echoed through the storm. "Do not touch your weapon," barked the lead tactical agent, a burly man who had the laser sight of his rifle painted directly on the center of Hale's chest. "Take your hand off your weapon and step away from the special agent." Hale looked at the red laser dot dancing on his uniform shirt. He looked at the 6 heavily armed federal agents surrounding him. He looked at ASAC Pierce, striding toward him. And finally, slowly, he looked at the black woman he held in handcuffs. Kendra simply stood there in the rain, perfectly calm, staring back at him. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had completely flipped, crushing Hale beneath it. She's got a fake badge," Hale stammered, his arrogance instantly replaced by pathetic panic. He let go of Kendra's arm as if she had suddenly caught fire. He took 2 steps back, raising his hands, trembling in the air. ASAC Pierce stopped a few feet away. He glanced down at the mud. He saw the ruined leather credential case, the gold shield stamped with the FBI seal pushed into the dirt. Pierce's jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in his cheek. Pierce looked up at Officer Reed, who was still standing with his arms skyward. "Are you the partner?" Yes, sir," Reed squeaked. "Officer Nolan Reed." "Sorry, I didn't want any part of this. I told him her plates were clean." Pierce ignored him, turning his piercing gaze onto Hale. "What is your name, officer?" "Hale," he choked out. "Grayson Hale." "Well, Grayson," Pierce said, his voice dangerously low and quiet, contrasting sharply with the chaotic strobes in the pouring rain. "Now you have exactly 1 chance to hand me the keys to those handcuffs, or my team is going to use bolt cutters to remove them, and then we are going to use them on you." Hale's hands shook so violently he could barely extract the small silver key from his belt pouch. He practically tossed them to Pierce, desperate to distance himself. Pierce walked around behind Kendra and quickly unlocked the cuffs. They fell away. Kendra rubbed her wrists, rolling her shoulders to work out the stiffness. She walked over to the mud, bent down, and retrieved her muddy credentials. She wiped the dirt off the gold shield with her thumb. "Agent Vaughn," Pierce said, his tone softening only slightly as he looked at her. "Are you injured?" "No, sir," Kendra replied clearly. "Just a little strained." He was rather enthusiastic with his application. Pierce nodded. He turned back to Hale, who looked like a man standing on the gallows trapdoor. "Officer Hale," Kendra said, stepping forward. The rain had plastered her hair to her face, but her eyes were like flint. "As I was trying to tell you before you drew your weapon on a federal officer and ground my badge into the mud, you were making a career-ending mistake. I thought you were lying," Hale pleaded, his voice whining. "You didn't look like an agent. You were out here. It's late." "I didn't look like an agent," Kendra repeated, the implication hanging heavy in the air. "Or I didn't look like someone who deserved basic human respect." Hale had no answer. He swallowed hard. "Agent Vaughn," Pierce interrupted, turning to Kendra, "I need an official statement on scene. Did this man draw his firearm on you?" "Yes, sir," Kendra confirmed. "Unprovoked. He pointed a loaded Glock, a .22, directly at my head while I was seated in my vehicle with my hands on the wheel." "Did he physically assault you?" "He forcefully grabbed me, shoved my face into the roof of my vehicle, and wrenched my shoulder while applying restraints, all after I clearly identified myself as federal law enforcement." Pierce nodded slowly. He looked at the tactical team leader. "Disarm him." 2 heavily armored agents moved in instantly. One grabbed Hale's arms, forcing them behind his back with the exact same rough, humiliating force Hale had just used on Kendra. The other agent swiftly unbuckled Hale's gun belt, stripping him of his Glock, his taser, his cuffs, and his radio. They kicked his legs apart, patting him down aggressively in the rain. "Hey, you can't do this," Hale yelled, a fleeting surge of his old arrogance trying to surface. "I'm a sworn police officer. I have jurisdiction here. You call my captain." "Your captain," Pierce said, stepping directly into Hale's face, "is currently being woken up by a phone call from the director of the FBI field office. He is being informed that one of his officers has committed a slew of federal felonies, including assault on a federal officer, civil rights violations under color of law, and armed kidnapping." The color completely drained from Hale's face. The word kidnapping echoed in his mind. He wasn't just getting written up. He wasn't going to get a slap on the wrist and desk duty. He was going to federal prison. "Cuff him," Pierce ordered. The loud, definitive ratchet of the steel handcuffs locking around Grayson Hale's wrists sounded like a vault door slamming shut on his life. It had been exactly 2 minutes since he had laughed at Kendra's badge. 2 minutes to destroy his own life entirely. The Oak Haven Police Department was a relic of a bygone era. A squat brick building nestled between a decaying strip mall and a diner that closed early. At that hour, the precinct was practically a tomb. Desk Sergeant Marcus Ellis, a man who had spent years perfecting the art of sleeping with his eyes open, was jolted awake by the shrill, unrelenting ring of the captain's private line. Upstairs in a wood-paneled office, smelling faintly of cheap cigars and stale bourbon, Captain Harlan Voss was already awake, clutching a telephone receiver to his ear with a trembling, sweaty hand. Voss was a classic local politician wearing a badge, a man who had built his career not on solving crimes, but on knowing whose driveways to plow in the winter and whose speeding tickets to lose in the shredder. Grayson Hale was his top earner in civil asset forfeitures, a tough cop who kept the undesirables out of Oak Haven. "Director," Captain Voss stammered into the phone, the color draining from his ruddy cheeks. "I assure you there has to be some kind of massive misunderstanding. Officer Hale is one of my most decorated—" "Captain Voss?" The icy voice of the special agent in charge of the Atlanta FBI field office cut through the line like a scalpel. "This is not a negotiation. This is a courtesy call. By the time you hang up this phone, my agents will be walking through your front doors. They are not coming to file a complaint. They are coming to take custody of your evidence room, your server drives, and your dash cam backups. If you or any of your deputies interfere with a federal investigation, you will be joining Officer Hale in federal lockup." The line went dead. Voss stared at the receiver, a cold bead of sweat trickling down his spine. Before he could even stand up, the heavy reinforced glass doors of the Oak Haven Police Department shattered the quiet night. They didn't just open. They were thrust apart with overwhelming authoritative force. Downstairs, Sergeant Ellis reached for his radio, but his hand froze halfway. A dozen federal agents clad in full tactical gear and windbreakers bearing the bold yellow FBI lettering flooded the small lobby. They moved with a terrifying synchronized efficiency. 2 agents immediately bypassed the reception desk, heading straight for the server room down the hall. Another 2 moved to secure the perimeter. Walking calmly through the center of this organized chaos was ASAC Donovan Pierce. Beside him walked Special Agent Kendra Vaughn. She was no longer covered in highway mud. She had changed into a crisp, dark tactical uniform from the back of the Tahoe, her gold shield now hanging prominently around her neck on a heavy chain. Her service weapon was strapped to her thigh. But the most shocking sight to Sergeant Ellis was the man being marched in behind them. Officer Grayson Hale, the terror of Highway 119, the untouchable bully of Oak Haven, was practically being dragged by two burly federal agents. His uniform was soaked and filthy. His duty belt was gone. His hands were shackled behind his back in heavy federal iron. His face was a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked small, broken, and utterly pathetic. Rookie Officer Nolan Reed followed meekly at the rear, uncuffed but escorted by an agent, looking like a ghost who had just witnessed an execution. Captain Voss came rushing down the stairs, his uniform shirt half untucked, desperately trying to project authority. "What is the meaning of this? You can't just barge into my precinct?" ASAC Pierce stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at Voss with a gaze that could freeze boiling water. He reached into his coat and produced a thick stack of papers sealed with the heavy stamp of a federal magistrate judge. "Captain Harlan Voss," Pierce announced, his voice echoing in the cramped lobby. "I have here a federal search and seizure warrant signed by United States District Judge Harlan Thorpe. We are seizing all digital and physical records pertaining to Officer Grayson Hale, including dash cam footage, body cam footage, personnel files, and internal affairs complaints dating back years. We are also seizing the digital storage of this entire facility." "On what grounds?" Voss blustered, his voice cracking. He looked at Hale, silently pleading for the officer to give him a reasonable explanation. Hale just stared at the floor, shivering. "On the grounds that your officer just held a supervisory special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation at gunpoint, battered her, destroyed federal property, and attempted a false arrest under the color of law." Kendra stepped forward, her voice ringing out with crystal clarity. Voss's eyes darted to Kendra, recognizing the name the director had just screamed at him over the phone. He looked at the gold badge resting against her chest. He realized instantly that his good old boy network could not save him from the United States Department of Justice. "Now," Kendra continued, turning her sharp gaze to Desk Sergeant Ellis, "I need the keys to your temporary holding cells. Officer Hale is going to sit in a cage while we dismantle the hard drives of this corrupt little fiefdom." "You're putting one of my men in our own holding cell?" Voss gasped, horrified by the humiliation. "No," Pierce corrected him softly. "We are putting a federal prisoner in a holding cell while we process the paperwork for his transfer to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Atlanta. Hand over the keys, or we will remove the doors from the hinges." Ellis didn't hesitate. He practically threw the ring of heavy brass keys across the desk. Hale was marched down the narrow hallway toward the holding cells. As the heavy steel bars slammed shut behind him, the deafening clang echoed through the precinct. He collapsed onto the cold metal bench, burying his face in his hands. The reality of his situation was crashing down on him. He had messed with the wrong woman, he had messed with the wrong agency, and there was absolutely no way out. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Atlanta skyline casting long, harsh shadows through the blinds of Interrogation Room B inside the FBI field office. It had been hours since the raid in Oak Haven. Grayson Hale had been transported in the back of a blacked-out federal transport van, stripped of his uniform and issued a standard bright orange heavy cotton jumpsuit. The transition from the predator of Highway 119 to an inmate wearing a generic prisoner number had completely shattered his psyche. He sat hunched over the metal table, his hands cuffed to a steel ring bolted to the table surface. The heavy steel door clicked open. Hale looked up, his bloodshot eyes filled with a desperate, lingering hope that his high-priced police union attorney had arrived to bail him out. Instead, Special Agent Kendra Vaughn walked into the room. She wasn't wearing tactical gear anymore. She wore a sharp, tailored navy blue suit. She carried a thick manila folder and a steaming cup of coffee. She didn't look angry. She didn't look vindictive. She looked entirely, terrifyingly professional. She pulled out the metal chair opposite him and sat down, placing the folder on the table. She took a slow sip of her coffee, letting the silence stretch, forcing Hale to sit in his own agonizing anxiety. "Where is my lawyer?" Hale rasped, his throat dry. "I demand to see Arthur Whitaker." The union called him. "Mr. Whitaker is currently in the lobby," Kendra replied evenly, opening the folder. "He is at this very moment reviewing the dash cam footage we pulled from your cruiser, along with the high-definition footage from the 3 FBI Tahoes that intercepted you. I expect he will be in here shortly to advise you to take whatever plea deal the United States Attorney is willing to offer." Hale swallowed hard. "You can't do this. I made a mistake. It was dark. You didn't identify yourself clearly." Kendra didn't raise her voice. She simply slid an 8x10 glossy photograph across the table. It was a still frame from Hale's own dash cam. It clearly showed Kendra, illuminated by the blinding spotlight, her hands perfectly positioned on the steering wheel, completely compliant. "I stated my name, my title, and my agency," Kendra said, tapping the photo. "I followed every protocol designed to keep law enforcement safe. You ignored it because you wanted to play a game. You wanted to feel big." She slid a second photograph across the table. It was a close-up of her FBI credentials, ground deep into the mud, bearing the unmistakable tread mark of Hale's tactical boot. "Destruction of federal property," Kendra narrated calmly. "Assault on a federal officer, armed kidnapping, deprivation of rights under color of law. That last one, Grayson, carries a maximum sentence of life in prison if it includes an attempt to kill or the use of a dangerous weapon." "You pointed a loaded firearm at my head." Hale began to shake. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I thought it was a fake badge." "Ignorance is not a defense for violating the United States Constitution," Kendra replied, leaning forward slightly. "But here's the real twist, Grayson. This interview isn't actually about what you did to me on Highway 119. Hale looked up, confused. "What?" "You picked the wrong person to pull over tonight," Kendra continued, her voice turning cold and sharp. "But when my team seized your precinct's servers, we didn't just find the dash cam footage of my traffic stop. We found the deleted files. We found the secondary hard drive Captain Voss tried to hide in the ceiling tiles." The blood completely vanished from Hale's face. He looked like he was going to be sick. "We found the dash cam footage from years ago," Kendra said, reading from a document in the folder. "The traffic stop involving a young Hispanic man named David Ramirez, whom you claimed resisted arrest before you broke his orbital bone. We found the footage of the elderly black couple whose car you illegally searched and seized thousands from under the guise of suspected drug proceeds. We found years of systematic, racially motivated abuse, excessive force, and constitutional violations. Kendra closed the folder with a sharp, definitive snap. I am not just the agent you assaulted, Grayson. I am the lead investigator of the newly formed Civil Rights Task Force investigating the Oak Haven Police Department, and you just handed us the keys to the entire corrupt castle. The door opened again. Arthur Whitaker, a sleek, highly paid defense attorney in a $5,000 suit, stepped into the room. He looked at Hale, and instead of the usual aggressive confidence defense lawyers projected, Whitaker just looked incredibly tired. Arthur, Hale pleaded, pulling against the chain binding him to the table. Tell her she can't use that stuff. Tell her it's inadmissible. Whitaker sighed, placing his briefcase on the floor. He looked at Agent Vaughn, offering a curt, respectful nod which Kendra returned. Then he looked down at his client. Grayson, Whitaker said softly, removing his glasses. The rookie, Nolan Reed. He signed a federal immunity proffer minutes ago. He is currently singing like a bird in the room next door, detailing every illegal search and falsified report you forced him to sign for the last several months. Hale's jaw dropped. The ultimate betrayal. His own partner had flipped on him. They have the deleted dash cams. They have the internal emails between you and Captain Voss, coordinating the cover-ups, Whitaker continued, brutally dismantling any last shred of Hale's hope. U.S. Attorney Nolan Caldwell is personally overseeing the indictment. Grayson, they have you dead to rights on over 20 federal civil rights violations. Hale slumped forward, resting his forehead against the cold steel table. The bravado, the arrogance, the badge, it was all gone. He was nothing but a criminal caught in a trap of his own making. What's the deal? Hale whispered, his voice cracking with a sob. There is no deal for you, Mr. Hale, Kendra said, standing up and smoothing her jacket. She looked down at the broken man who had threatened her life just hours prior. The U.S. Attorney is seeking a 25-year mandatory minimum sentence in federal prison, and given your history, I highly doubt the judge will show you any leniency. Kendra picked up her coffee and her manila folder. She walked toward the heavy steel door. Before she opened it, she paused and looked back over her shoulder. You told me that in Oak Haven you were the law, Kendra said quietly, her words echoing in the sterile room. Welcome to the federal system, Grayson. Here, no one is above the law. She stepped out. The heavy door slammed shut, leaving Hale alone with his attorney, his terrifying future, and the crushing weight of his own karma. The morning sun broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on the Oak Haven Police Department. By mid-morning, the precinct was completely unrecognizable. The perimeter was taped off with bright yellow crime scene tape, and federal agents were methodically loading dozens of cardboard boxes, computer towers, and filing cabinets into a fleet of unmarked white box trucks. Upstairs, Captain Harlan Voss was pacing his office like a trapped animal. His uniform was rumpled, his tie hanging loose around his thick neck. He held his cell phone to his ear, listening to the agonizing sound of continuous ringing. Finally, the line clicked open. Senator Whitmore's office. How may I direct your call? A crisp receptionist's voice answered. This is Captain Voss. I need to speak to Calvin right now. It is an absolute emergency, Voss barked, trying to inject authority into his trembling voice. State Senator Calvin Whitmore had been Voss's political patron for years. The man who ensured Oak Haven kept its generous state funding despite the whispers of corruption. There was a brief pause, followed by muffled voices. Then the receptionist returned. I apologize, Captain Voss. The senator is completely booked today and will be entirely unavailable for the foreseeable future. He advises that you direct all further communication to his legal counsel. The line went dead with a harsh click. Voss stared at the phone, the blood turning to ice in his veins. Whitmore had cut him off. He was radioactive. The good old boy network had instantly dissolved the moment the letters FBI entered the chat. He was completely alone. Downstairs, the heavy reinforced doors swung open again. Supervisory Special Agent Kendra Vaughn walked in, flanked by ASAC, Donovan Pierce, and a specialized team of forensic accountants from the Bureau's white-collar crime division. Kendra wasn't just here to secure evidence against Grayson Hale anymore. She was here to dismantle the entire operation. Captain Voss, ASAC, Pierce's voice boomed up the stairwell, carrying the weight of a judge's gavel. Come down here right now. Voss practically dragged his feet down the stairs, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. Agent Pierce, Agent Vaughn. Look, whatever Hale did out there on the highway, it was the act of a rogue officer. We had no idea. Save it, Harlan, Pierce interrupted, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet rumble. He didn't use the man's rank. Kendra stepped forward, holding a thick, leather-bound ledger encased in a clear plastic evidence bag. Voss's eyes locked onto the book, and his knees nearly buckled. It was the black book. The off-the-books ledger he kept hidden behind a false panel in the precinct's boiler room. It's amazing what a terrified rookie will tell you when facing years as an accessory, Kendra said smoothly, her eyes locked onto Voss. Nolan Reed told us exactly where to look. We didn't just find the deleted dash cam files of Officer Hale abusing motorists. Captain, we found the money. Voss opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Civil asset forfeiture, Kendra continued, her voice echoing in the silent lobby. When Officer Hale pulled over out-of-state drivers, specifically minorities, he wasn't just doing it for the power trip. He was doing it for the cash. Thousands from an elderly couple here. More from a traveling salesman there. He claimed it was suspected drug money, seized it without filing charges, and brought it straight to you. Pierce stepped closer, towering over the corrupt captain. And according to this ledger, Captain, you didn't deposit those funds into the department's equipment budget. You deposited them into a series of shell LLCs controlled by your brother-in-law, which then conveniently funneled back into your re-election campaign and the mortgage of your lake house. That book is a forgery, Voss stammered pathetically, a man drowning in a puddle of his own making. You have no proof I directed him to do that. We have the wire transfers, Harlan, Kendra said coldly. We have the bank records, and as of minutes ago, we have Officer Grayson Hale's signed confession. Once he realized he was facing a quarter-century in federal lockdown, he was very eager to explain exactly who gave him his marching orders. The ultimate betrayal. The loyalty among corrupt cops was a myth. When the federal hammer dropped, it was every rat for himself. Captain Harlan Voss, ASAC, Pierce said, producing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for racketeering, embezzlement of public funds, wire fraud, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Turn around and put your hands behind your back. As Pierce secured the cuffs, the front doors opened. 3 local news vans from Atlanta had just pulled into the parking lot, tipped off by a strategic leak from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Cameras with bright spotlights were already rolling. Walk, Pierce ordered. Voss was perp-walked out of his own precinct, stumbling over his own feet, down the front steps. The flashing bulbs of the press cameras illuminated his flushed, humiliated face. The citizens of Oak Haven, people who had lived in fear of his corrupt regime for years, had begun to gather on the sidewalks. There was no cheering, just a silent, heavy judgment as the untouchable captain was folded into the back of an unmarked federal SUV. Kendra stood on the steps watching the convoy pull away. The thief had fallen. Now it was time for the gavel to drop. Months later, the courtroom inside the Richard B. Russell Federal Building in downtown Atlanta was a cavern of polished mahogany and intimidating marble. The air conditioning hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the boiling tension radiating from the defense tables. Grayson Hale sat at the defendant's table. He looked completely broken. He had lost significant weight, his once imposing physique deflated. He wore a standard-issue federal inmate jumpsuit. The bright orange fabric was a glaring reminder of his total loss of power. His hair had thinned, and his skin was a sickly pale gray from months of isolation in the Metropolitan Correctional Center. A few feet away at a separate defense table sat Harlan Voss, looking equally ruined, his political arrogance replaced by the trembling reality of a ruined man. The gallery was packed. In the front row sat the victims. There was David Ramirez, the young man whose orbital bone Hale had shattered. Next to him sat the elderly black couple whose retirement savings had been stolen on the side of Highway 119. And sitting quietly in the second row, wearing her dark navy suit, was Supervisory Special Agent Kendra Vaughn. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing sharply. "The United States District Court for the Northern District of Georgia is now in session. The Honorable Judge Harlan Thorpe presiding." Judge Thorpe, a man with a shock of white hair and a reputation for absolute zero tolerance regarding public corruption, took the bench. He didn't look at the files. He looked directly down at Hale and Voss. United States Attorney Nolan Caldwell stood at the podium. "Your Honor, the defendants before you did not just break the law, they weaponized the badge. They turned a police department into a localized cartel, preying on the citizens they were sworn to protect. Officer Hale used a deadly weapon to intimidate, assault, and kidnap under the color of law, culminating in the aggravated assault of a federal agent. Captain Voss orchestrated this abuse for his own financial gain. The government asks for the maximum penalty under the sentencing guidelines." Hale's high-priced attorney, Arthur Whitaker, had nothing left to offer. He had tried to suppress the dashcam footage, tried to discredit the ledger, but the federal prosecutors had buried them in an avalanche of irrefutable, high-definition evidence. "Mr. Hale," Judge Thorpe's voice resonated through the silent courtroom like thunder. "Stand up." Hale stood, his hands shaking so violently they rattled against the wooden table. "I have read the victim impact statements," Judge Thorpe began, his eyes narrowing. I have watched the dash cam footage. I watched you point a loaded firearm at the head of a compliant, unarmed woman simply because her presence offended your deeply ingrained prejudices. You mocked her federal credentials. You told her that you were the law. Hale swallowed hard, a tear finally slipping down his hollowed cheek. You are not the law, Mr. Hale, Thorpe stated, his tone dripping with absolute disdain. You are a bully who hid behind a piece of tin, and when a real law enforcement officer stood up to you, your entire illusion of power collapsed in a matter of minutes. The judge picked up his gavel. On the counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, aggravated assault on a federal officer, and armed kidnapping, I sentence you, Grayson Hale, to 25 years in the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons. In the federal system, there is no parole. You will serve every single day of that sentence. Bang! The heavy wooden gavel struck the sound block. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Hale collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands as a gut-wrenching sob tore from his throat. 25 years? He would be an old man, long forgotten, before he ever saw the outside of a concrete wall. Mr. Voss, stand up, Thorpe ordered without skipping a beat. Voss stood, gripping the table for support. For the crimes of racketeering, embezzlement, and conspiracy to violate civil rights, I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison, followed by complete asset forfeiture of all properties tied to your illicit funds. Bang! Justice was swift, brutal, and utterly final. Federal marshals immediately moved in, grabbing Hale and Voss by the arms, hauling them toward the side door that led directly to the holding cells. As Hale was dragged away, he locked eyes with Kendra Vaughn one last time. Kendra didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She just offered a slow, solemn nod of finality. The predator had become the prey, consumed by the very system he had abused. Outside the courthouse, the Atlanta air was warm and clear. Kendra walked down the marble steps, putting on her dark sunglasses. Near the bottom of the steps stood Nolan Reed. He was wearing jeans and a work shirt, having immediately resigned from law enforcement after turning state's evidence. He had avoided prison, but he carried the heavy guilt of his complacency. Agent Vaughn, Reed called out nervously. Kendra stopped. Mr. Reed, I just wanted to say thank you, Reed mumbled, looking at the pavement, for stopping it. I was too much of a coward to do it myself. You did the right thing in the interrogation room, Nolan, Kendra replied smoothly. You have a second chance now. Don't waste it. She walked past him, heading toward her unmarked government vehicle parked on the street. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was ASAC Pierce. Another cartel node had been identified on the border. Duty was calling. Special Agent Kendra Vaughn slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled out into the city traffic, disappearing into the flow of the very society she had sworn her life to protect. The shadows on Highway 119 had finally been cleared. If this story of absolute karma and justice made your heart race, you are not alone. There is nothing more satisfying than watching an arrogant, corrupt bully completely underestimate his victim, only to have his entire world shattered by the brutal reality of federal law. Agent Kendra Vaughn didn't just survive the night. She dismantled an entire corrupt empire without ever losing her cool. Now that is true power. If you love this intense, real-life inspired takedown, smash that like button to show your support for real justice. Make sure you hit share to send this epic story of instant karma to your friends. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell. We upload hard-hitting, dramatic stories of true justice, intense karma, and brilliant revenge every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Agent Vaughn's shoes? See you in the next